I am reading chapters 4 and 5 of the Count of Monte Cristo, abridged for Bantam Classics. Chapter 4 vocabulary. Betrothal. This is an engagement. Hors d'oeuvres are appetizers. They're very small. Commissary in this context means a officer of the police. Customs are the rules about entering a port or harbor in this context. Chapter 5 vocabulary is aristocratic. Aristocratic were the elites in society. They were the wealthy. Stratum is a level, and in this context, it's the level of society. A usurper is a person who usurps, and usurp means to take as in power and authority. Monopolize means to control something. Revolutionary means of a revolution, and in this case, we're talking the French Revolution. A dowry is something a woman's family paid her fiancé to marry her. A prosecutor is a lawyer working on behalf of the government to prosecute people of crimes and get them put away if they are guilty. An antechamber is a room to the side of another room, so like a foyer almost. Impassivity is the state of being impassive, and impassive means hard to rouse into an emotional state, so hard to make angry, happy, anything. Radical means very controversial in this context. Denunciation is a letter usually denouncing someone or something, saying why it's wrong or that they committed a crime. Imprudence is a lack of prudence, and being prudent means to make good decisions. So this is a person who was not careful if you're saying that a man or woman has imprudence. Apprehension is a concern and unwillingness. Conspiracy is an arrangement to commit a crime. And haggard means very tired in appearance. The things you need to know for this chapter are that betrothal feasts were held shortly before weddings, usually the day of. Royalists support the monarchy of King Louis XVIII. Bonapartists or Girondins support Napoleon Bonaparte, and they are very severe enemies at this time. Chapter 4. The weather was splendid the next day. The sun rose clear and bright, tinging the foamy crests of the waves with a reddish purple. Preparations for the betrothal feast had been made in a large room on the second floor of La Reserve, with whose arbor we are already acquainted. The feast was scheduled to begin at noon, but by 11 o'clock the tavern was filled with impatient guests. They were the favored sailors of the Pharaon and several soldiers, friends of Dantès. It was rumored that Monsieur Morel himself was coming to the feast, but this was such a great honor for Dantès that hardly anyone dared believe it. When the shipowner actually did arrive, he was greeted by hearty cheers from the sailors of the Pharaon. His presence was taken as confirmation of the report that Dantès was to be their captain, and since he was well liked by the crew, they were thankful that for once the shipowner's choice was in harmony with their own desires. Danglars and Caderousse were sent out to notify Dantès of Monsieur Morel's arrival and tell him to hurry, but they had taken scarcely 100 steps when they saw the small bridal party approaching. Edmond and Mercedes were accompanied by 4 bridesmaids and Edmond's father. Behind them walked Fernand, wearing an evil smile. But Edmond and Mercedes did not notice this. They were so happy that they saw nothing but themselves and the beautiful blue sky which seemed to be blessing them. As soon as they were within sight of La Reserve, Monsieur Morel went downstairs and came out to meet them, followed by the other guests. Then they all climbed back up in the wooden staircase, which creaked for 5 minutes under their heavy footsteps. The hors d'oeuvres were served as soon as they sat down. "What a silent party!" exclaimed Edmond's father as he inhaled the fragrance of a glass of yellow wine which had just been placed before Mercedes. It certainly doesn't sound as though there were 30 light-hearted people here. Husbands aren't always light-hearted, remarked Caderousse. The fact is, said Dantès, that right now I'm too happy to be gay. If that's what you mean, you're right. Joy sometimes has a strange effect. It can oppress us almost as much as sorrow. You're not worried about anything, are you? Said Danglars. It seems to me everything's going perfectly for you. That's exactly what worries me, replied Dantès. I don't think man was meant to attain happiness so easily. Happiness is like those palaces and fairy tales whose gates are guarded by dragons. We must fight in order to conquer it. I don't know what I've done to deserve the good fortune of being Mercedes' husband. Husband? Exclaimed Caderousse, laughing. Not yet, Captain. Just try to act like her husband now and see how you're received. Mercedes blushed. Fernand twisted in his chair and wiped away the large beads of sweat which gathered on his forehead like the first raindrops of a storm. Just then, confused sounds were heard on the staircase. Heavy footsteps, a hubbub of voices, and the clanking of swords rose above the sounds of merrymaking within the tavern. Everyone became silent. There were 3 loud knocks on the door. "Open in the name of the law!" cried a resounding voice. No one answered. The door opened, and a police commissary entered, followed by 4 armed soldiers led by a corporal. "What's the matter?" asked Monsieur Morrel, stepping up to the commissary whom he knew. "There must be some mistake." "If there's a mistake, Monsieur Morrel," replied the commissary, "it will soon be corrected. In the meantime, I have a warrant for arrest, and I must do my duty. Which one of you gentlemen is Edmond Dantès?" All eyes turned to the young man, who, strongly agitated, but nevertheless maintaining his dignity, stepped forward and said, "I'm Edmond Dantès, sir. What do you want with me?" "Edmond Dantès, you're under arrest." "Under arrest?" cried Dantès, turning pale. "But why?" "I don't know, but you'll be told the reason at your first examination." Monsieur Morrel realized that further discussion was useless. A commissary with a warrant for arrest is no longer a man, but a statue of the law, cold, deaf, and mute. Dantès' father, however, rushed toward the commissary. There are some things which the heart of a father or a mother will never understand. He begged and supplicated. Tears and prayers accomplished nothing, but his despair was so great that the commissary was touched by it. "Calm yourself, sir," he said. "Your son may only have neglected some customs formality, and it's quite possible he'll be released as soon as he'd given the information desired." Meanwhile, Dantès had shaken hands with his friends and told them, "Don't worry, the mistake will soon be cleared up, probably even before I reach the prison." He walked down the stairs, preceded by the commissary, surrounded by the soldiers. A carriage was waiting for him at the door. He climbed into it. The commissary and 2 soldiers climbed in after him. The door closed, and the carriage set out for Marseille. Chapter 5. In one of the houses of aristocratic architecture on the Rue de Grand Cour, another betrothal feast was being celebrated on the same day and at the same hour. But instead of humble workers, sailors, and soldiers, the guests of this feast were members of the highest stratum of Marseille society. They were former magistrates who had resigned their offices during the usurper's reign, old officers who had deserted their posts to join Condé's army, and young men who had been raised by their families in bitter hatred of the emperor. Napoleon, who was then king of the Isle of Elba, ruling over a population of 5,000 or 6,000 after having heard shouts of "Long live Napoleon" from 120 million subjects in 10 different languages, was regarded by these people as a man whose downfall was complete and final. To these joyful and triumphant royalists, it seemed that life was beginning anew, that they were awakening from a terrible nightmare. The Marquis of Saint-Méran, an old man wearing the cross of St. Louis, stood up and proposed a toast to King Louis XVIII. The response was enthusiastic. Glasses were raised instantly, and the ladies took off their bouquets and strewed the table with flowers. "Ah," said the Marquise of Saint-Méran, a woman with forbidding eyes, thin lips, and an aristocratic and elegant figure despite her 50 years. If all those revolutionists who persecuted us during the Reign of Terror were here now, they would have to agree that ours was the true devotion, for we remained faithful to a crumbling monarchy while they attached themselves to the rising sun and made their fortunes while we were losing everything we owned. They would have to admit that our king was truly Louis the Beloved, while their usurper was never anything except Napoleon the Cursed. Isn't that right, Monsieur de Villaflor? Excuse me, madam, I wasn't following the conversation. Leave the young people alone, said the Marquis. They're going to be married soon, and they naturally have other things than politics to talk about. Forgive me, mother, said a lovely young girl with blonde hair and soft eyes. I was monopolizing Monsieur de Villaflor's attention. You're forgiven, Renee, said the Marquise with a tender smile, which was surprising to see on such a stern countenance. I was saying, Monsieur de Villaflor, that the Bonapartists had neither our conviction, our enthusiasm, nor our devotion. Yes, madam, but they have something which replaces all that. Fanaticism. Napoleon is the Muhammad of the West for all those vulgar but highly ambitious people. For them, he's not only a legislator and a master, he's a symbol, the personification of equality. Robespierre represented a lowering equality. He brought kings to the guillotine, while Napoleon represented an elevating equality. He raised the people to the level of the throne. I suppose you know, Monsieur de Villaflor, said the Marquise, that what you're saying has a strong odor of revolution about it. But I forgive you. One can't expect the son of a Girondin to be entirely free from a spice of the old leaven. Villaflor flushed crimson. It's true that my father was a Girondin, madam, he said, but I've separated myself not only from his opinions, but even from his name. My father was, and perhaps still is, a Bonapartist, and his name is Noirtier. I am a royalist, and my name is Villaflor. Let the revolutionary sap dry up and die in the old trunk, madam, and consider the young shoot which has grown apart from it without having the power or even the desire to detach itself from it entirely. Bravo, Villaflor, said the Marquis. Well spoken. I've always tried to persuade my wife to forget the past, but without success. Perhaps you'll be more fortunate than I. Very well, said the Marquise. Let's forget the past. I'm quite willing. I only ask that you'll be inflexible in the future, Monsieur de Villaflor. If a conspirator should fall into your hands, remember that you'll be closely watched because you're from a family which may be in league with the conspirators. Alas, madam, said the Villaflor, my profession, and especially the times in which we live, require me to be severe. I've already had several political accusations to deal with, and they've given me an opportunity to prove my severity. And unfortunately, we haven't yet finished with these matters. Really? Asked the Marquise. I'm afraid not. Napoleon is on the Isle of Elba, almost within sight of our shores. His presence there keeps the hopes of his partisans alive. Yes, said the Marquise, but either the king rules or he does not. If he rules, his government must be strong and its officials inflexible. It's the only way to prevent evil. Unfortunately, madam, said Villaflor, smiling, a deputy public prosecutor always arrives after the evil has been done. Then it's up to you to repair it. Allow me to say once again, madam, that we don't repair evil, we only avenge it. Just then, a servant entered and whispered something into Villaflor's ear. He excused himself, left the table, and returned a few moments later. My time is never my own, he said to his fiancée. They've come to disturb me even here with you at my own betrothal feast. What's the matter? Asked the girl anxiously. I've just been told about a very serious matter. It seems a small Bonapartist plot has been discovered. Really? Exclaimed the Marquise. Here's the letter of denunciation. He read aloud. The public prosecutor is hereby informed by a friend of the throne and of religion that Edmond Dantès, first mate of the ship Pharaon, which arrived this morning from Smyrna, after having stopped at Naples and the Isle of Elba, had been entrusted by Marat with a letter to the usurper, and by the usurper with a letter to the Bonapartist party of Paris. Confirmation of his crime can be obtained by arresting him, for the letter will be found either on his person, in his father's house, or in his cabin on board the Pharaon." "But," said Renee, "that letter is anonymous, and it's addressed to the public prosecutor, not you." "Yes, but the public prosecutor is absent. His secretary was instructed to open all his correspondence. He opened this one, sent for me, and being unable to find me, gave orders to have the man arrested." "Where is he now?" asked Renee. "At my house." "Then go, my boy," said the Marquis. "Don't neglect your duty in order to stay with us. Go where the service of the king calls you." Villaflor had scarcely left the room. He abandoned his joyous expression and took on the grave air of a man called upon to decide on the life or death of his fellow man. Actually, however, aside from the thought of his father's political opinions, which might prove disastrous for his future if he did not separate himself completely from them, Gerard de Villaflor was at that moment as happy as it is given a man to be. Although only 27 years old, he was already rich and held a high position in the magistracy. He was about to marry a pretty girl whom he loved, not passionately, but reasonably, as befits deputy public prosecutor. In addition to her beauty, which was remarkable, Mademoiselle de Saint Méran belonged to a family which high favor at court. Furthermore, she had a dowry of 150,000 francs and could expect to inherit another 500,000 someday. The combination of all these things composed for Villaflor a happiness which was nothing short of dazzling. He found a police commissary waiting for him at the door. The sight of this man immediately brought him down to earth again. Putting on an even more serious expression, he said to him, "I've read the letter. You did well to arrest that man. Now give me all the information you have about him and the conspiracy." "We don't know anything about the conspiracy yet, sir. All the papers found on the man have been placed in your desk under seal. As you read in the letter, the prisoner's name is Edmond Dantès, and he's first mate of the three-master Pharaon, which trades in cotton with Alexandria, Smyrna, and belongs to the firm of Morel & Son." Just then, Villaflor was approached by a man who seemed to have been waiting for him to pass. It was Monsieur Morel. "Monsieur de Villaflor," he called out, "I'm glad I was able to find you. A fantastic, ridiculous mistake has been made. The first mate of my ship, Edmond Dantès, has been arrested." "I know that, sir," replied Villaflor. "I'm on my way to question him." "Oh," cried Morel, carried away by his friendship for the young man. "You don't know him. He's the gentlest, most trustworthy man in the world." Villaflor, as we have seen, belonged to the aristocratic segment of the city, and Morel to the plebeian. The first was a zealous royalist, while the second was suspected of having hidden Bonapartist leanings. Villaflor looked disdainfully at Morel and replied coldly, "You may be sure, sir, that you have not appealed to me in vain if the accused is innocent. But we live in a difficult time, sir, and if he is guilty, I shall be forced to do my duty." Having arrived before his house as he spoke these words, he entered majestically, after having taken his leave of the shipowner with icy politeness. The antechamber was full of soldiers and policemen guarding the prisoner. Villaflor cast a swift glance at Dantès, took the bundle of papers which a policeman handed him, and walked out of the room. His first impression of Dantès was good, but he had often heard it said as a profound political maxim that we must distrust our first impulses, and he applied the maxim to his impressions as well as his impulses. He therefore stifled his kindly feelings, assumed the expression he reserved for grave occasions, and sat down at his desk with a menacing frown. Dantès entered a moment later. He was still pale, but calm and smiling. He greeted his judge with easy politeness and looked around for a seat. "What is your name and occupation?" asked Villaflor, fingering the notes the policeman had given him when he entered. "My name is Edmond Dantès. I'm first mate of the ship Pharaon, which belongs to Morel & Son." "How old are you?" 19. "What were you doing when you were arrested?" "I was attending my own betrothal feast," replied Dantès, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm about to marry a woman with whom I've been in love with for 3 years." Villaflor started in spite of himself. The coincidence shook his usual impassivity and struck a chord of sympathy in the depths of his soul. He too was about to be married, and he had now been called upon to destroy the joy of a man who, like himself, was on the point of attaining his supreme happiness. The philosophical comparison will make a good impression on Monsieur de Saint Méran's salon, he thought, and he proceeded to compose in advance the little speech he would make. This done, he turned his attention back to Dantès and asked, "Have you ever served under the usurper?" "I was about to be drafted into the navy when he fell from power." "I've been told that you have radical political opinions," said Villaflor, who had been told nothing of the sort, but who had no qualms about posing the question in the form of an accusation. "My political opinions, sir? I'm almost ashamed to say so, but I've never had anything that might be called an opinion. I'm only 19, as I've already told you, and I know very little. I wasn't destined to play any important role in life. Anything I am, and anything I may be in the future, if I receive the position I hope for, I owe to Monsieur Morel. All my opinions are limited to these feelings. I love my father, I respect Monsieur Morel, and I love Mercedes. That's all the information I can give you, sir. As you can see, it's not very interesting." Villaflor watched Dantès closely. The young man was so candid and open, so full of affection for his fellow man, including even his stern judge, that it seemed to Villaflor that each word he spoke was a proof of his innocence. "Do you have any enemies?" asked Villaflor. "Enemies? No, I'm not important enough to have made any. As for my character, I may be a little too quick-tempered, but I've always tried to control myself with my subordinates. I have 12 sailors under my orders. Question them, sir, and they'll all tell you they love and respect me." "If you've made no enemies, you may at least have aroused some jealousy. After all, you're about to become a captain at the age of 19, and you're about to marry a beautiful woman who loves you, which is a rare stroke of good luck on this earth. Either of these two things may have made certain people envious of you." "Yes, you may be right. I'm sure you know human nature better than I do. But if these envious people are among my friends, I'd rather not know who they are, because then I'd be forced to hate them." "You're wrong to think that way. We must always try to see things around us as clearly as possible. And you seem to be such a worthy young man that I'm going to help you throw some light on your situation by showing you the written denunciation which has been brought before me. Here it is. Do you recognize the handwriting?" Dantès read the letter. A dark cloud passed over his face, and he said, "No, sir, I don't recognize this handwriting. It's disguised, but it's quite plain. I'm lucky," he added, giving Villaflor a look of gratitude, "to be dealing with a man like you, because this is the work of a real enemy." The way the young man's eyes flashed as he spoke these words revealed to Villaflor all the violent energy that was hidden under the gentleness which had impressed him so deeply at first. "Now," said Villaflor, "answer me frankly, not as a prisoner before a judge, but as a man in a false position, speaking to another man who has his interest at heart. What truth is there in this anonymous accusation?" He dropped the letter on his desk with an expression of disgust. "I'll tell you the whole truth, sir, and I swear it on my honor as a sailor, by my love for Mercedes, and by my father's life. After we left Naples, Captain Leclerc fell ill with brain fever. Feeling that he was about to die, he called me to him and said, 'My dear Dantès, swear to me on your honor that you will do what I'm about to ask you. It's a matter of great importance.' 'I swear it, Captain,' I said. 'After my death,' he said, 'you'll take command of the ship, since you're first mate. Head for the Isle of Elba. Go ashore at Porto Ferrario. Ask for the marshal and give him this letter. You may be given another letter or entrusted with a mission. That mission was to have been for me, but you'll carry it out in my place, and all the honor will be yours.' 'I'll do it, Captain,' I said, 'but it may not be as easy to see the marshal as you think.' 'Here's a ring which will remove all the obstacles,' he said, and he gave me a ring. 2 hours later, he became delirious. The next day, he was dead." "Then what did you do?" "What anyone else would have done in my place, sir. The request of a dying man is always sacred, but for a sailor, the request of a superior officer is an order which must be carried out. I arrived at the Isle of Elba the next day and went ashore alone. As I predicted, I had some difficulty in seeing the marshal at first, but I sent him the ring and all doors were open to me. The marshal gave me a letter addressed to Paris and asked me to deliver it in person. I promised him I would do so, for it was in accordance with the last wishes of my captain. I landed at Marseille, quickly took care of all the formalities on board, then went to see my fiancée, whom I found more beautiful and loving than ever. Finally, sir, I was attending my own betrothal feast. I was going to be married the same day, and I intended to leave for Paris tomorrow when I was arrested on the basis of this denunciation, which you now seem to despise as much as I do. You seem to be telling the truth, said Villaflor. If you're guilty, it's only through imprudence, even your imprudence is justified by your captain's orders. Give me the letter you received on the Isle of Elba. Give me your word of honor to appear whenever you may be summoned, and go back to your friends. Do you mean I'm free, sir? Cried Dantès, overcome with joy. Yes, but first give me the letter. You must have it already, sir. They took it along with my other papers. Just a moment, said Villaflor to Dantès, who was taking his gloves and hat. To whom is the letter addressed? To Monsieur Noirtier, Rue Coheron in Paris. A thunderbolt could not have struck Villaflor more suddenly or more unexpectedly. He sank back into his chair, from which he had risen to pick up the bundle of papers that had been taken from Dantès, drew out the fateful letter, and glanced at it with indescribable terror. Monsieur Noirtier, 13 Rue Coheron, he murmured, turning still paler. Yes, sir, replied Dantès, surprised. Do you know him? No, said Villaflor emphatically. A loyal servant of the king does not know conspirators. Is the letter about a conspiracy? Asked Dantès, who, after believing himself to be free, now began to be more alarmed than at first. In any case, sir, as I've already told you, I know nothing about the contents of the letter. Yes, murmured Villaflor, but you know the name of the man to whom it's addressed. I had to know that in order to deliver it, sir. Have you shown this to anyone else? Asked Villaflor, reading the letter. To no one, sir, I swear it. No one else knows that you were to deliver a letter from the Isle of Elba to Monsieur Noirtier. No one except the man who gave it to me, sir. This is too much, muttered Villaflor as he read the letter. His tightly compressed lips, his trembling hands, and his flashing eyes awakened painful apprehensions in Dantès. If he knows what's in this letter, thought Villaflor, and if he ever learns that Noirtier is Villaflor's father, I'm ruined forever. He made a violent effort to control himself and then said to Dantès as calmly as possible, I see now that there are very serious charges against you. I no longer have the power, as I thought at first, to set you free immediately. You know how I've tried to help you, but I must continue to hold you prisoner for a while, as short a time as possible. The main evidence against you is this letter, and as you see, he stepped over to the fireplace, threw the letter into the flames, and stood watching it until it had been reduced to ashes. As you see, he continued, I've destroyed it. Oh, cried Dantès, you're more than just, sir, you're kindness itself. I think you now realize that you can have confidence in me, so listen to my advice. I'll keep you here until tonight. Someone else may come to question you. If so, tell him about everything you've told me except the letter. Not one word about that. I promise, sir, said Dantès. If anyone asks you about it, deny it. Deny it firmly, and you'll be saved. I'll deny it, sir. Don't worry. Good, said Villaflor. He pulled a bell cord, and a moment later, the police commissary entered. Follow this gentleman, said Villaflor to Dantès. The latter bowed, gave him one last look of gratitude, and went out. As soon as the door had closed behind him, Villaflor's strength failed him, and he sank into his chair, half fainting. Oh my God, he murmured. If the public prosecutor had been in Marseille, he would have seen the letter, and I would have been lost. Oh, Father, will you always be an obstacle to my happiness? Must I struggle eternally against your past? Then suddenly, an unexpected light seemed to dawn in his mind. A smile appeared on his lips, and his haggard eyes became fixed and seemed to be staring at a thought. Yes, he said, That letter, which could have ruined me, may make my fortune instead. Come on, Villaflor, to work." After making sure that the prisoner was no longer in the antechamber, the deputy public prosecutor hurried to his fiancée's house.